NIC Kay, take 4, reading Dionne Brand, A Map to the Door of No Return, Arriving at Desire, page 182. It is only now I recall, when recalling is all art, that the first book I read and fell into like a fish falling into water was a book about the Haitian Revolution of 1791. It was owned by my uncle, a teacher, and had no cover. The pages were thick and absorbent, their color a yellowish cream from age, the ink still dark and pungent. The book had lain in the bottom drawer of the wardrobe for as long as I could remember, with a book on mathematics, geometry, and a Bible that was my grandmother's. It was in the same drawer where my grandmother kept stores of rice and sugar and syrup shine breads and just in case goods and around Christmas black cakes. She stored them under her good tablecloth, her good sheets, and the good pillowcases. So the book was walked over by little red sugar ants, and it was bored through by weevils. It was mapped by silverfish. It was thick with the humidity of rainy seasons and dry with the aridity of dry season days. It had no spine, though it had a back. It had no front cover. It had been sewn together. Through the sewing was loose in some places. The thread almost rotted. It had been glued. The glue now caked off in caramel-like flakes from the original binding. I recall the title running over the top of each page, The Black Napoleon. I recall that the first letter on each chapter was larger than the rest of the words. I remember certain names: Toussaint, Henry Christophe, Dessalines. I cannot recall the author. I've never checked to see if such a book actually existed. I never looked for or found the particular book again. I prefer to think of it still at the bottom of the wardrobe drawer, waiting for me to fall into its face. The wardrobe drawer, brown, the color of mahogany, the bottom drawer was deep. It was heavy and it stuck at times, a pillowcase caught in the groove, wood lice altering its tracks, requiring some skill to open it quietly. There was always a fine dust in the base of the drawer, the work of colonies of insects moving their unseeable world to and fro. The book moved around from corner to corner too. I do not remember if it began with the first chapter. I suspect not. The front cover had long disappeared. What made me fall into this book was probably some raid on my grandmother's cakes or sweetbreads. I was probably trying to steal some of her chem milk powder or the sugar she buried there also, as if it were not the sole ambition of children to seek out secrets. She rotated her hiding places, of course, but the wardrobe could always be counted on because before we ruined it, there was a lock. And she kept the key in her bosom or under her pillow. My grandmother read the Bible from that drawer, putting her finger under each word, then tiring, her eyes or her grasp giving out. She placed it in the recess at the head of the bed before falling asleep, some psalm dying on her lips. The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer. My God, my strength in who I will trust, my buckler and the horn of my salvation and my high tower. The psalm was a prohibition to our desire and our sign of her power attached so intimately, so ardently to the Lord. It was a psalm denoting her territory, the breath of her command. But when she was asleep, we forgot her power. Then the wardrobe drawer was a lore of tablecloth covered cakes soaked in rum to keep them moist, and crumbling shortbreads in tins from away, powdered milk and ponds, pink face powder, dates and chocolates melting to cherry centers in the heat. Andrew liver salts, which frothed in the mouth, avocados left in brown paper to ripen. What led me to this book then were my senses, my sweet tooth, my hunger, my curiosity, the intrigue, the possibility of outsmarting my grandmother. The geometry book I only remember as pages of drawings, signs and symbols, with thick, dense writing, which I could not follow, though I remember elaborate structures, a kind of inexplicable intelligence that I knew I would never conquer, but I felt I ought to. It had lain in the drawer for years as a companion to the Black Napoleon, but I never got close to it. I've always been bad at geometry. I cannot recall the day I decided to read the book, but it must have been the day after my uncle said not to touch it. Then it became as irresistible as the other contents of the drawer. I opened the book, at first leaving the drawer open with the book lying inside, and began to read. Then I took it to my spot behind the house, then to my spot below the bed. After slipping into this book, I understood that my uncle must have fallen into its face too, and he didn't want any more pages torn out. This book filled me with sadness and courage. It burned my skin. I lay asleep on its open face under the bed. It was a book that took me away from the world, from the small intrigues of sugar and milk to the pleasure and desolation of pages, words on a page. For days I lived with these people I found there, hoping and urging, frightened and elated. The book was about the uprising led by Toussaint Overture against the French on Saint Dominique. In it, I met a history I was never taught. The history I had been taught began in 1492. Christopher Columbus discovered Santo Domingo with his three ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. He discovered the New World. I had been given the first sightings of land by Cristobal Colon as my beginnings. His eyes, his sight, his view, his vindication, his proof, his discovered terrain. These were to be mine. All the moil and hurt proceeding from his view were to the good, the evolutionary, a right and just casualty of modernity. Everything was missing from the middle of that story. Empire was at the end. So I had never met Toussaint Overture, and until I saw him at the bottom of the wardrobe drawer with the cakes and sugar. Perhaps I also met there I had never felt before. I did not know about slavery. I had never felt pain over it. In fact, I had never felt pain except the pain that children feel, immediate and transient. I had never seen, well, what can you see in 8 years or so of living, suffering? I did not yet know how the world took people like me. I did not know history. The book was a mirror and an ocean.